Well, good morning and welcome to Breakfast Extra. It's beginning to look a lot like history class every time that we pop in here to do the monologues. But isn't that what traditional culture curation should actually be about? Telling the facts without bending them or forcing audiences to take one side or the other. Now, I say that to say this. Social media democratizes conversations, and it does that very well. But it also democratizes ignorance. I'll give you an example. Let's take Hawaii, for instance. The hula was once a sacred dance linked to worship and, of course, healing. But today, thanks to Instagram Reels, you'll find it reduced to a tourist dance in grass skirts and sold for likes and shares. In India, millennial-old verdict chants are now remixed into 15-second TikTok background sounds. Yes, it's catchy, yes, but it's no longer sacred, not anymore. So now let's bring it back to Africa, Nigeria here. Ask the Igbo people, the red cap, it isn't just a hat, it's a title, a lifetime of respect and responsibility. And that backhand handshake, not for common people, but reserved for chieftains and men of honor. But on Instagram today, you'll see it being used arbitrarily here and there. Now, this is the danger of the digital age. When culture becomes clickbait, it often loses its roots because social media buries history faster than any colonizer could. And right now, in Yoruba land, that same thing is actually happening to the Yoruba culture. Because the latest battle trending online is not a new skit, nope, it's not a new scandal. It's the old rivalry between the Alaafin of Oyo and the Ooni of Ife. But what TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter serve you today as fast gossip is really a centuries-old story of thrones, treaties, and tampered tradition that cannot be told in digest form with the expectation that you will grasp the weight of the dispute and its cultural significance to the Yoruba people, and also the history of colonial interference. So, let's pull back the curtains once again. See, before colonial intrusion, the Yoruba world was clear about order. The Ooni of Ife sat in Ife as custodian of the sacred, keeper of the link to Dudua, the spiritual compass of the people. The Alaafi, on the other hand, of Oyo, well, he was the imperial engine, commander of armies, overseer of territories, head of a political system with checks and balances. There were two crowns, two functions, one spiritual on one side, the other worldly on the other side. No clash, no contest. It was like yin and yang, where both existed side by side to the benefit of the other. But then came the British with treaties in one hand and divide and rule mentality in the other. So in 1851, after the bombardment of Lagos, which by the way is where the word Agidingbi comes from, Britain began inching into Yoruba territories. By 1861, Lagos was annexed. By 1888 to 1893, Captain Robert Lister Bower was signing what became known as the Bower Treaties with Ibadan chiefs. Now, these documents effectively ceded Yoruba towns to British protection. Now, the British had a problem. Yoruba land wasn't a village. It was a federation of powerful city-states, each one having its own king. To rule effectively, they wanted one crown to speak for all the crowns. And voila, the Alaafin of Oyo, sitting on an empire that once stretched as far as Dahomey and Togo, well, he looked like the convenient answer because he was in charge of the Yoruba armies. So the colonial masters styled the Alaafin as head of the Yoruba people. And now there, Kata constat. Because it wasn't a Yoruba consensus. It was British administrative laziness. Why deal with dozens of crowns when one could just serve as a funnel? But by doing this, the British sowed confusion because Yoruba tradition had never erased the Ooni's primacy. Ife was, and still remains, the cradle of existence, the spiritual beginning. The Ooni wasn't a military ruler, but his stool represented the divine legitimacy of all Yoruba crowns. That sacred order clashed with the British practical order, and suddenly two truths began to coexist, the ancestral truth and the colonial paperwork. Now, fast forward to 1914, Frederick Lugard, completing his amalgamation project, leaned on this same colonial hierarchy to justify indirect rule, making the Alaafi appear like the emir of Yoruba land. That's because it worked in the north where they tried it. Convenient for Britain and the Caliphate, but alien to Yoruba tradition. And so the poison was passed down. And the echoes of that confusion still rings up until today. Which is why in 2025, we're still watching palace statements, counter statements, ultimatums, and even threats of publishing Supreme Court rulings. But while they battle, social media does what social media does best. It turns sacred debates into entertainment. Team Oni versus Team Alafi, memes, hashtags, polls, and clapbacks. And this is where the real danger lies. Not in the rivalry itself, but in how we, the people, are letting the internet become judge and jury over our culture. Instead of preserving nuance, we're simplifying it into basbos. Instead of respecting legacy, we're asking Twitter polls to tell us who's supreme. Now, if we keep this up, Yoruba history won't just be contested, it'll be forgotten. Because culture doesn't disappear in one grand fire. It erodes little by little, reel by reel, tweet by tweet, hashtag by hashtag, until one day it's no longer recognizable, even by the people who inherited it. And so here's the real challenge now. Not just for the Yoruba people, but for Nigeria at large. Do we want to be the generation that live streamed our traditions into oblivion, or the one that achieved, explained, and passed it on with dignity? The Alafi and Oni were never meant to be rivals. They were meant to be pillars, one spiritual, one imperial, holding up the house of a people. If they forget that, well, they weaken the house. But if we, the people, forget that, we risk demolishing it altogether. So maybe before you jump on the next trending hashtag, we need to pause and ask ourselves, are we preserving history, or are we dancing on its grave? Because culture, well, it can survive colonizers, it can survive wars, we know that. But the real question is, can it survive the internet? That, my friends, is the real supremacy battle. Remember, tradition is not Big Brother.